The scorching summer sun blazed over the cracked sidewalks of Phoenix, Arizona. The heat was relentless, turning the city's streets into shimmering waves of exhaustion. Inside their air-conditioned cars, drivers cruised past, shielding themselves from the unbearable temperature. But out there, standing on the corner of a bustling intersection, was Miguel, a 12-year-old boy with a mission far bigger than himself. His once white t-shirt was stained with sweat and dust, his sneakers had holes in the toes, and his legs ached from standing all day. But none of that mattered. What mattered was selling just one more bottle of water. Not for himself, but for his sick mother, who lay in bed at home, too weak to move. "Cold water, $1, Miguel called out, holding up a bottle dripping with condensation. Passers-by barely glanced his way. Some smiled politely but kept walking. Others sneered, scoffing at the idea of buying water from a kid on the street. Rejection after rejection. He refused to give up. Then, a sleek black motorcycle pulled up to the curb. The rider removed his helmet, revealing a face Miguel had only seen on movie posters and TV screens. His heart stopped. Keanu Reeves? And in that moment, Miguel's life was about to change forever. Under the merciless Arizona sun, Miguel stood tall, his small cooler by his side, his hands gripping a bottle of water like it was his last lifeline. His throat was dry, his stomach rumbled from hunger, and his skin burned from hours under the sun, but none of that mattered. He had a mission, one that couldn't wait. Every dollar he made wasn't for him, it was for his mother, Rosa, who was too sick to get out of bed. Her dialysis treatments cost $300 per session 3 times a week, an impossible number for a struggling family, barely keeping up with rent. Miguel had overheard her desperate phone calls to the hospital, pleading for more time, her voice cracking as she whispered, "What are we going to do?" He couldn't just stand by and watch. So here he was, standing on the street corner, offering bottles of water to anyone willing to buy. "Cold water, $1, he called out, forcing a smile. Some people ignored him. Others chuckled at the sight of a kid selling water in 110-degree heat. A group of teenagers passed by, one sneering, $1? Who even buys water from the street?" before bursting into laughter. Miguel clenched his jaw but held his ground. This wasn't about pride. It was about survival. Hour after hour, the rejection piled up, his shoulders sagged, his voice grew weaker, and doubt began to creep in. What if I don't make enough? What if I go home empty-handed? And then, just as his hope began to waver, the roar of a motorcycle cut through the scorching air. Miguel wiped the sweat from his forehead, his body aching from hours of standing under the relentless Arizona sun. The cooler beside him was still half full, a painful reminder that he hadn't sold nearly enough to make a difference today. His mother needed treatment, and every dollar counted. But despite his determination, people barely noticed him. He was just a kid selling water on the street, easily ignored, easily forgotten. Then, the deep rumble of a motorcycle broke through the heat-soaked air. Miguel barely paid attention at first, his mind too preoccupied with his growing doubts. But when the sleek black bike pulled up to the curb, something about the way the rider moved caught his eye. The man swung a leg over the motorcycle with an effortless confidence, removing his helmet in one smooth motion. That's when Miguel saw him. The sharp jawline, the dark sunglasses, the effortlessly cool presence. This was no ordinary customer. This was Keanu Reeves. Miguel's breath caught in his throat. He had seen that face before, plastered across movie posters, on TV screens, in blockbuster films. But never in a million years did he expect to see him standing right in front of him. His fingers clenched the bottle of water so tightly that the plastic crinkled. Keanu tilted his head slightly, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice calm and unmistakable. "How much for a bottle?" Miguel swallowed hard, his voice almost failing him. "Oh, $1, sir?" Keanu nodded, reaching into his pocket. Miguel's heart pounded as he watched the Hollywood legend casually pull out a crisp $100 bill and hand it to him. "For one bottle?" Miguel asked, staring at the money in disbelief. Keanu smiled. "For starters." For a moment, Miguel's world tilted. This had to be a dream. His mind struggled to catch up with reality. $100? That was enough to buy food for at least a week. Maybe even help cover part of his mom's prescription. "Thank you," Miguel finally whispered, his voice barely audible. Keanu twisted the cap off the water bottle and took a long drink, acting as if this was just another normal day. But Miguel knew better. This was anything but normal. And that's when something shifted. People around them started noticing. A man walking his dog slowed his steps. His gaze locked on Keanu. A few cars hesitated at the stoplight as their drivers did double takes. Across the street, someone pulled out their phone, whispering excitedly to a friend. But Miguel barely noticed any of it. His focus was locked on the bill in his hand. The life-changing weight of it. Keanu leaned casually against his motorcycle, watching him with an easy expression. "You always out here selling water?" Miguel hesitated before nodding. "Not always," he admitted. "Just since my mom got sick." Keanu's expression softened. Miguel looked away, pretending to adjust a bottle in his cooler. "She needs dialysis," he said quietly. 3 times a week. But we can't afford all the sessions, so sometimes she has to miss one." His throat tightened, but he forced himself to keep talking. "She used to work at a restaurant, but she got too sick. I thought maybe if I sold enough water I could help, at least a little." Silence stretched between them. Miguel had told this story before, to the occasional kind stranger who stopped to ask, but something about telling him felt different. Maybe it was because Keanu actually listened, not just in a polite way, but in a way that made it seem like he truly understood. Keanu exhaled through his nose, nodding slowly. "That's rough, kid," he said, his voice steady but thoughtful. "And you've been doing this all on your own?" Miguel shrugged, suddenly feeling embarrassed. Yeah, my mom doesn't know though. She'd tell me to stop and just go to school, but..." He looked down at his worn-out sneakers, shuffling them against the pavement. "I can't just sit at home and watch her get worse." Another long pause. Miguel suddenly wished he hadn't said so much. What was he expecting? That Keanu Reeves would swoop in and fix everything? That only happened in movies. But then Keanu moved. He reached into his leather jacket and pulled out something small and dark. A checkbook. Miguel's heart stuttered. Keanu flipped it open, clicked a pen, and started writing. His face was calm, focused, as if he had already made up his mind. Miguel watched, stunned, as Keanu ripped the check from the book and held it out to him. "Take it," Keanu said simply. Miguel hesitated, his hands trembling as he reached for the paper. When he turned it over, his breath caught in his throat. The number written in perfect ink was $50,000. His chest tightened. His legs felt weak. I can't take this," Miguel stammered, looking up at Keanu with wide, disbelieving eyes. "It's too much." Keanu crouched slightly, leveling their gazes. "Listen to me, Miguel," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You're out here in this heat, working hard, trying to take care of your mom when most kids your age wouldn't even think about it. That's not too much. That's exactly the kind of person who deserves help." Miguel's vision blurred as tears filled his eyes. He blinked rapidly, his fingers tightening around the check like it might disappear. "I don't even know how to thank you," he whispered. Keanu smiled. "You already did," he said. "By being the kind of son any mother would be proud of." A sob escaped Miguel's throat as he clutched the check to his chest. His mind raced. He imagined running home, bursting through the front door, telling his mom that everything was going to be okay. Keanu squeezed his shoulder gently before standing back up. "Take care of her, all right?" Miguel nodded quickly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "I will." And just like that, his life had changed forever. But what neither of them knew was that this was just the beginning. Miguel stood frozen, the $50,000 check clenched in his trembling hands. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it over the distant hum of traffic. The Arizona heat pressed down on him, but he barely felt it. His mind was still struggling to process what had just happened. Keanu Reeves, the Keanu Reeves, had just handed him more money than he had ever seen in his life. The Hollywood icon watched him with quiet patience, as if he understood the storm of emotions raging inside the 12-year-old boy. Miguel swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to say something, anything, but his words stuck, trapped between disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. I don't know how to thank you," Miguel finally managed, his voice cracking. Keanu smiled, his expression warm but steady. "You already did," he said simply, "by being the kind of son any mother would be proud of." Miguel's eyes burned with unshed tears. For the first time in a long time, hope felt real. But before he could fully absorb what had just happened, the air around them shifted. A murmur rippled through the small crowd that had unknowingly gathered. Some people whispered excitedly, their eyes locked on Keanu, while others held up their phones, recording what was quickly becoming an unforgettable moment. Then, a voice cut through the murmurs. "Hey, kid, what's that you got there?" Miguel's stomach twisted. A man in a sweat-stained tank top stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes locked onto the check in Miguel's hands. Something about the way he looked at it, not with curiosity but with greed, made Miguel's grip tighten instinctively. Keanu, still standing beside him, turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. "He earned it," Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. The man let out a short, dry laugh. "Yeah, selling water?" He eyed Miguel, then flicked his gaze back to the check. "That's a lot of money for a kid to be carrying around. You sure you can keep it safe?" Miguel's pulse spiked. His instincts screamed at him to get home. Now. Keanu must have sensed it too, because his stance subtly shifted, his shoulders squaring as he took a single, deliberate step forward. "There's a problem?" Keanu asked, his tone level, but carrying an unmistakable edge. The man hesitated, glancing around at the crowd, then back at Keanu. Miguel could feel the tension thick in the air, pressing down like the heat of the sun. A long silence stretched between them, then finally the man scoffed, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Whatever, man," he muttered, before turning and disappearing into the crowd. Miguel exhaled sharply, realizing only then that he had been holding his breath. "You all right?" Keanu asked, his voice softer now. Miguel nodded quickly. "Yeah," he said, though his hands still trembled. "Yeah, I'm good." Keanu studied him for a moment before nodding. "You need to get that home." Miguel knew he was right. This check wasn't just paper, it was survival. He needed to get back to his mother before anything else happened. But just as he turned to leave, a woman stepped forward from the crowd, her purse in hand. "Wait," she said, reaching inside. "I want to help too." Miguel blinked as she pressed a $50 bill into his palm. Then another person stepped forward. "Me too," a man said, dropping a $100 bill into Miguel's cooler. Then another and another. Within seconds, people started stepping forward, pulling out wallets, handing over whatever cash they had. Some gave small bills, others handed him hundreds. One person even wrote another check. Miguel's heart pounded, but this time not from fear. "Kid, your story deserves to be heard," someone in the crowd said. "You're amazing," another person added. Miguel's chest tightened with emotion. He wasn't alone anymore. Keanu watched silently, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The kindness he had shown had sparked something bigger than either of them had expected. By the time Miguel gathered up the last of the cash, his cooler wasn't full of water anymore. It was full of money. Tears burned at the edges of his eyes. Keanu finally stepped closer, leaning down slightly. "Go home, kid," he said, his voice quieter now. "Tell your mom it's gonna be okay." Miguel nodded quickly, still struggling to process everything. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Keanu gave him a small nod, then slid his helmet back on. Miguel didn't wait any longer. He turned on his heel and ran. He ran past the crowd through the busy streets, his chest burning from the rush of emotions. He ran toward home, toward his mother, toward a future that suddenly didn't feel impossible anymore. As Miguel clutched the $50,000 check in his trembling hands, the moment felt surreal. His heart pounded as he stared at it, barely able to believe what had just happened. But then, something unexpected began to unfold. The small crowd that had gathered to witness the exchange between Miguel and Keanu Reeves had been silent at first, processing what they had just seen. Then, a woman stepped forward, reaching into her purse. "Wait, I want to help too," she said softly, pressing a $50 bill into Miguel's palm. Before Miguel could even react, a man stepped up beside her. "Me too," he said, dropping a crisp $100 bill into Miguel's cooler. And then another person, and another. Within seconds, a chain reaction of generosity had begun. People from all directions approached, digging into their wallets, pulling out cash, whatever they could give. One man in a business suit handed Miguel $200, smiling as he said, "You're a good kid. Keep looking out for your mom." A young mother holding a toddler leaned down and placed a handful of 20s into Miguel's cooler. "I lost my mom when I was young," she murmured. "I wish I could have done what you're doing." Someone in the back shouted, "Start a GoFundMe. This kid deserves more." Miguel stood frozen, overwhelmed, watching as total strangers, people who had never met him, never known his struggles, rallied behind him. By the time the last donation was dropped into his cooler, it wasn't full of water anymore, it was full of hope. Miguel's feet barely touched the pavement as he ran through the familiar streets of Phoenix, Arizona. His chest burned, not from exhaustion, but from a rush of adrenaline and pure, unfiltered joy. He clutched the thick envelope of cash and the $50,000 check against his chest like a lifeline. If he had to get home, now, the apartment complex loomed ahead, a worn-out beige building with rusted railings and cracked sidewalks. It wasn't much, but tonight it felt different. Tonight this place would be filled with something it hadn't seen in months. Hope. Miguel practically flew up the stairs, skipping steps in his urgency. His fingers fumbled with the front door as he pushed it open. "Mom," he shouted, breathless, his voice shaking. "Mom!" The dimly lit living room was quiet, except for the distant hum of the air conditioning unit struggling against the summer heat. The scent of chamomile tea lingered in the air, faint, but familiar. From the bedroom, a soft voice called out, "In here, mijo!" Miguel didn't hesitate. He rushed in to find his mother, Rosa, lying on the bed, her frail body barely able to sit up. Her once vibrant brown eyes, dulled by months of exhaustion, flickered with confusion as she saw her son standing there, chest heaving, tears brimming in his wide eyes. "You're home early," she murmured weakly, trying to push herself up. "Did you—" Her words stopped mid-sentence when she saw the envelope of cash and the check in Miguel's trembling hands. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, in a voice so small it barely escaped his lips, Miguel whispered, "We don't have to worry anymore, Mom." Rosa's tired eyes darted between the check, the money, and her son's tear-streaked face. Miguel dropped to his knees beside the bed, clutching the check like it was the most fragile thing in the world. "It was Keanu Reeves, Mom," he gasped, his words tumbling over each other. "The Keanu Reeves. He bought a bottle of water for me, and then he gave me this, $50,000. Rosa's breath hitched in her throat, and then stared at the check, her fingers tracing over the ink as if touching it would somehow make it more real. Tears welled in her eyes, slipping silently down her cheeks. Then, without warning, she pulled Miguel into a tight, shaking embrace. "My sweet boy," she whispered, her voice breaking completely. "I don't even know what to say." Miguel buried his face against her shoulder, his tears finally breaking free. "Just tell me you'll be okay, Mom," he choked out. Rosa let out a soft, tearful laugh, pulling back just enough to cup his face in her hands. "I'll be okay, mijo," she whispered. For the first time in a long time, Miguel believed her. After the initial shock settled, Rosa insisted on calling the dialysis clinic. "Tomorrow," she told them, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "I'll be there first thing. Tomorrow." Miguel sat beside her, his heart still struggling to keep up with reality. A few hours ago, he had been standing on a street corner, exhausted and hopeless. Now, everything was different. And just as he thought the night couldn't hold any more surprises, a knock sounded at the door. As Rosa wiped the last of her tears, still clutching the $50,000 check, a sudden knock at the door made both her and Miguel freeze. They weren't expecting anyone. Rosa glanced at Miguel, concern flickering in her tired eyes. "Are you expecting someone, mijo?" Miguel shook his head, his stomach twisted as he slowly pushed himself off the bed. His hands were clammy as he walked toward the door, his heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. He reached for the handle, hesitated for just a second, then pulled it open, and his heart stopped. Standing there, as casual as if he had just dropped by for a cup of coffee, was Keanu Reeves. This time, he wasn't wearing his helmet. His sunglasses were hooked onto the collar of his worn black t-shirt, and in one hand, he held a small brown paper bag. A faint smirk played at the corner of his lips. "Hey kid," Keanu said, tilting his head slightly. "Hope I'm not crashing the celebration." Miguel's jaw dropped. He tried to speak, but his brain short-circuited. Keanu Reeves was at his door. Behind him, Rosa let out a small, breathless gasp. "Oh my God," she whispered. Miguel snapped back to reality, jumping aside so quickly he nearly tripped over himself. No, come in, please," he blurted, his voice shaking. Keanu stepped inside, glancing around at the tiny apartment. He nodded approvingly. "Nice place," he said, his voice calm, easy. "Reminds me of my first apartment in LA. Tiny, but full of love." Miguel couldn't breathe. His mother was still sitting on the couch, her hands clasped over her mouth, eyes shimmering with fresh tears. Keanu turned to her and held out his hand. "You must be Rosa," he said warmly. Rosa reached out with trembling fingers, taking his hand as if she wasn't sure if this was real or a fever dream. I don't even know what to say," she whispered. Keanu smiled. "You don't have to say anything." Then, he lifted the brown paper bag in his other hand and handed it to her. Miguel blinked. "What's this?" Keanu leaned against the arm of the couch, arms crossed, looking completely at home. "A little something extra," he said with a shrug. "Figured your mom might want a hot meal, and there's something else inside, too." Rosa's hands shook as she opened the bag. Inside was a container of fresh soup from an upscale restaurant, the aroma warm and rich, filling the small apartment with an intoxicating scent. But that wasn't all. There was an envelope. Miguel and Rosa exchanged a glance. Then, with trembling fingers, Rosa slowly pulled it out and opened it. Inside was another check. Rosa gasped. Her eyes flew to Keanu's in shock and disbelief. This is too much," she choked out. "I can't." Keanu held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "You can, and you will," he said, his voice firm but kind. Miguel leaned over to see the number. His breath hitched. $100,000. A fresh wave of tears filled Rosa's eyes. Her body visibly shook. Keanu's voice softened. "You, Miguel, you've got something special. Strength, kindness, that's rare, and it deserves to be rewarded." Miguel's chest ached with overwhelming gratitude. Rosa let out a shaky breath, trying to hold herself together. "I don't know how to thank you." Keanu smiled. "Just get better," he said simply. "That's all the thanks I need." Miguel swallowed past the lump in his throat. "You really don't have to do all this," he murmured. Keanu clapped a hand onto Miguel's shoulder. "I know," he said, "but I want to." Miguel looked up at him, his eyes glassy with emotion. For the first time in a long time, his mother wasn't drowning in stress. For the first time in a long time, their future wasn't a question mark, because a stranger, a man with no reason to care, had chosen to stop and make a difference. Miguel would never forget it. The next morning, Miguel sat on the couch, his fingers still tracing over the $100,000 check as if making sure it was real. Across the room, his mother, Rosa, was on the phone, scheduling her first full round of dialysis treatments in months. For the first time in forever, their world felt lighter. Then, Miguel's phone buzzed. He frowned, picking up the old, cracked screen phone that barely held a charge. But when he unlocked it, his stomach dropped. His name was everywhere. Hundreds, no, thousands of notifications flooded his screen. His hands trembled as he clicked on a link. It was a video. Someone had filmed the entire moment outside the convenience store, Keanu handing him the $50,000 check, the crowd gathering, the wave of strangers stepping up to help. It had gone viral overnight. Miguel's breath hitched as he scrolled through the comments. This is the kind of kindness the world needs. Keanu Reeves is an angel, but this kid is a warrior. What have we? Someone started a GoFundMe. Miguel's heart pounded as he clicked on a new link. Someone, a total stranger, had started a fundraiser for his mother's medical expenses. His mouth went dry as he stared at the number. $115,000 raised. He blinked, refreshed the page. $123,000. The donations were still pouring in. Miguel looked up at his mother, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, the whole world is helping us. And for the first time in years, Rosa didn't cry from fear, she cried from hope. Miguel sat on the couch, his hands still shaking as he refreshed the fundraiser page. The number had jumped again. $150,000. It wasn't slowing down. Across town, in a quiet Phoenix cafe, Keanu Reeves scrolled through his phone, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The world had noticed Miguel's story. News outlets were covering it, people were sharing it on social media, and celebrities were even commenting on the video. His phone buzzed with a text from his publicist. Ellen wants to bring Miguel on her show. Want to surprise him there. Keanu chuckled softly, shaking his head. He already knew his answer. Absolutely. Meanwhile, back at home, Miguel's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email. His stomach flipped as he read the subject line. Scholarship opportunity for Miguel Gonzalez. His mouth went dry. A local private school had offered him a full-ride scholarship. And then another message popped up, this one from a bottled water company. We'd love to offer you a sponsorship. A portion of every bottle we sell will go toward your family, and we're also setting aside a college fund for you. Miguel turned to his mother, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, I live, we really made it. Rosa reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly, tears of gratitude filling her eyes. No, mijo, you made it happen. Miguel sat on the worn-out couch in their tiny Phoenix apartment, staring at his phone screen in complete disbelief. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the fundraiser page, watching the number climb higher and higher. $200,000. His mother's medical bills were not only covered, they would never have to worry about rent, food, or hospital costs again. He turned to look at Rosa, sitting across from him at the small kitchen table, still holding onto the check Keanu Reeves had given her. Tears shimmered in her tired brown eyes, but for the first time in years, they weren't from fear. They were from hope. For so long, life had been a constant struggle. The weight of her sickness, the unpaid bills, the helplessness of watching her son carry responsibilities far beyond his years, it had all been suffocating. But now, in just a matter of days, everything had changed. Then Miguel's phone buzzed again. Another email. His stomach flipped as he read the subject line. Congratulations, Miguel. Full scholarship awarded. His hands gripped the phone tighter. A prestigious private school in Phoenix had just offered him a full-ride scholarship covering tuition, supplies, and even meals. He exhaled shakily. School had always been secondary to survival, but now he had a real chance. But it wasn't just about school. Another email popped up. A bottled water company wanted to sponsor him. We were so inspired by your story, Miguel. We'd love to have you as an ambassador for our brand. A percentage of our sales will go toward your family's medical expenses. And we're also setting aside a college fund just for you. Miguel blinked hard. A college fund? That was something he had never even dared to dream about. Just a few days ago, he had been a kid, standing on the street corner, desperately selling bottled water, hoping to make enough for his mom's next dialysis session. And now, his entire future was unfolding before him. The knock at the door startled them both. Miguel's heart leapt into his throat as he opened it, only to find a news crew standing outside. A reporter smiled, microphone in hand. Miguel, your story has touched hearts across the country. Millions of people have watched your journey. How does it feel to know that so many strangers care about you and your mom? Miguel hesitated, overwhelmed. He had never been one for attention, but as he looked past the reporter, he saw neighbors standing outside, smiling, waving. Some had tears in their eyes. And then it hit him. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about something bigger, the power of kindness, the power of one single moment to create a ripple effect that changed everything. He took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. It's amazing. I never thought so many people would care about us. I just wanted to help my mom, but now I know that there are good people everywhere, and I want to be one of them. I want to give back the way people gave to me. The reporter smiled, nodding. And what's next for you, Miguel? He glanced back at his mom, who nodded encouragingly, her face filled with pride. Miguel straightened his shoulders, feeling something new settle inside him. Confidence. Purpose. First, I'm going to make sure my mom gets better. And after that, I don't know exactly, but one day I want to be the one helping kids like me. The reporter beamed, and the cameras kept rolling. Inside their apartment, on the kitchen table, the $100,000 check from Keanu Reeves sat untouched next to a steaming bowl of soup. The meal that Keanu had brought when he showed up at their door, proving that small acts of kindness can change everything. The future was no longer something to fear. The struggle was over. The life they had fought so hard to hold on to was finally theirs to live. And it had all started with one bottle of water. Miguel sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the phone screen in his hand. The numbers on the fundraiser page had become almost surreal. $250,000 raised. His mother's treatments were covered. Their rent was secured for years. His future, once a distant dream, was now within reach. All of it, every single moment, had started with one bottle of water. Miguel exhaled slowly, his mind racing back to that first day on the street corner. The heat, the exhaustion, the humiliation from the teenagers who mocked him. He had felt invisible, like the world had already decided he wasn't worth noticing. And then Keanu Reeves stopped. One moment of kindness, one simple decision to help. And because of that, an entire chain reaction of generosity had followed. Strangers rallied behind him, donations poured in, scholarships were offered, and Miguel's life was never the same again. But this story isn't just about Miguel. It's about the power of kindness. It's about how one small act, one single decision to help someone in need can change a life. And now, the question isn't what happened to Miguel, it's what happens next. Because there are other Miguels out there, other kids standing on street corners, pushing through struggles most of us could never imagine, other families barely holding on, waiting for a miracle. And maybe, just maybe, you can be that miracle for someone. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Be the Keanu Reeves in someone's life. Help where you can, even if it's something as simple as buying a bottle of water. Share this story. Let the world see what happens when we choose kindness. You drop a comment below. What's the greatest act of kindness you've ever received or given? Let's inspire each other. And most importantly, never underestimate the power of one small act. Because one bottle of water changed Miguel's life. And tomorrow your kindness could change someone else's.